Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is I'm going to be implementing the post in which I'll be updating, or actually not updating, inserting new entries into the diary. So if I look here, I'll notice that in my entities, the diary class has a collection of entries. So down here in our data, we have a class called diary entry. So what we need to do here next is we need to go ahead and create, for like what the measure was for food, it had a collection of measures. So I need to do the same thing for a diary, and a diary has a collection of diary entry. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to go ahead and create a controller for diary entry. Okay, and here's the controller, diary entries controller, and I'll go ahead and implement our base controller here and create our constructor. Okay, so first thing that I've done here, I created a diary entries controller. I created a constructor that takes in our interface iCounting case repository and also our interface iCounting case identity service. I passed the repository to the base class, and I went ahead and created a field here for our identity service. So next thing that I need to do is I need to go ahead and create our two get methods. First get method is going to get the whole list of entries per controller. So what we need to do in this one is we need to go ahead and pass in the diary ID. So the first step here is I went ahead and first created the object get, passing in the diary ID, and then I'm getting back the list, IEnumerable list of diary entry object, putting into this diary entries variable, and I'm doing that by calling the repository get diary entries and passing our current user and diary ID. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to say var result. And then what I do is just say diary entries, and then we do the link here. Is what we want to do is get a to list. We also want to go ahead and select, and this is where we go ahead and select it into our model factory. So we are getting the entity here, but now when we get this entity, we are unable to get what we need correctly, because like we were talking earlier, we need the object that's going to hold other objects, and in order to do that we need to program it in a way that it won't create those circular references and that will be able to map these two together. And for that we're using this model factory. So inside of this model factory is where we have the method create, and we overload this method with our each individual diary entry class that goes in. And as we can see, we don't have an override there, so in our model factory we need to create another override that is going to take in a diary entry. Okay, so the next thing that I had to do, I had to create this, our first get that takes in diary ID as a date time. And like I said, in order to do that, I loaded this diary entries variable, calling the repository get diary entries, and then I took this diary entries, got it to list, and this is when I would actually go ahead and create, using this model factory, I would create the model for it. So in order to do that, I overload another create method here in a model factory, which takes in diary entry, returns diary entry model, takes in the URL. This is the URL that is going to build up, and I'm going to have to create another route for it, and it just simply assigns quantity, food description, measure description, and measure URL from the entity, which is the entry. So it takes some things from the entity and puts it into the model. But another very important thing here that I had to add is to my diary model, because diary model is actually holding the list of these entries. I had to go ahead and add this line of code so that every time when we create a diary, we also create the entries for it. So in order to do that, I had to make a change to diary create, diary model create, and then also my diary model class, I had to add IEnumerable diary entry model entries. So it's basically a list of diary entry models. So those are alternations that I had to make as I'm building this diary entries controller. So now that I have this, what I also have to do is I need to go to Web API config, and I do need to add another route for my diary entries. Do that by copying one of the other routes, renaming it, call it diary entries, and then changing route template and the defaults here. So now what I need to do, I need to create another, and I can actually change this to a diary entry here. I can change it to IEnumerable diary entry model. So next get that I need to create here is going to be for individual diary entry, not the whole list. And for that, what I need to pass in here, I need to pass in the diary ID. I need to pass in the actual entry ID. And I believe that should be int entry ID. But I also need to pass which diary it's in. So I still need to pass daytime diary ID. And integer my entry ID. So this get right here is supposed to return me only one instance of the diary entry itself. So first what I would do, I would say diary entry, which is my entity. I can call it diary entry since it's a single one, and then I would say call the repository and get diary entry, and this one takes in again the username, and it takes in the diary ID. This one takes 3 diary ID of the actual diary, which is our daytime, and then it takes entry ID, which we're passing in from the link. So here now we have a diary entry itself. I can say var result, and we say diary entry, and there's no to list here, so I believe here what we need to do is we need to go ahead and select we need to still create a model, so we need to call the same thing, model. So that was actually wrong. In this case, for our get for our individual entry, it seems like the entity is exactly the same like our model. So all we really have to do here is return our entity, and we can put into the var and just call it result, and this will give us our individual entity, which is the same as we don't have to do anything with it because it doesn't require us to select another model, another class inside of it. So just say var result, and also here we, instead of returning the object or type, what we could do here is return HTTP response message. So this is when we start getting to the HTTP response message. So if you can say if result is null, we should return HTTP message not found. Otherwise we should return model, and this is where we created. So what we should do here is we should return, we use request create response, HTTP status code, so if result is null, then we return request create response HTTP status code not found. Otherwise we return create response HTTP status OK. We pass in our result, which is actually using the model factory to create our model using the diary entry entity. So one small rookie mistake that I made here, and I wasn't sure, I had to take some time. I actually made this name of this parameter here different than what's in my right here, my route configuration, and if that happens, the overload for the method of the get here in the controller, it doesn't match. So this has to match, and then it's bypassing this. It's not even calling our second get because the parameters don't match. So that's something that looks like a rookie mistake. So once I did that, when I went ahead and ran, I have the list here of our diaries, each with the entries. This one has 15 entries on a 2017-8/24. If I click on individual entry, I can see that. And then also we have measure URL, and it goes to our measures, so it's kind of connected. So the next step is being able to post, in other words, being able to add entries. and I'm going to do that in the next video.